Hello and welcome today to our lovely guest, Merrilyn Heazlewood. Hi, Merrilyn.
Hi, Sue.
It's brilliant to speak to you today. And I have to say, this is the first time I've ever done a Stitchery Stories on a Saturday night at 8 o'clock. and Merrilyn has been very good and has got up early on Sunday morning because she currently is 11 hours ahead of me. So it's been a bit of a tricky one, hasn't it, Merrilyn, trying to find a slot between the two of us 11 hours apart.
It has, but it's working, so that's good.
Yay. Right, so I'm really thrilled to be speaking to Merrilyn. She's one of my online stitching friends, and we've exchanged lots of messages, etc., over the years. So I'm really chuffed about that, to be speaking with Merrilyn, and she's got a really great story for us. So here is Merrilyn's intro, and then we'll crack on with what she's been busy doing. It has been suggested to Merrilyn on more than one occasion that her epitaph should be, "Don't lick your thread." And Merrilyn's mantra is, "Stitching a world of contentment. Stitching is for enjoyment, and stitch to the best of your ability," which I think those three are just fabulous sentiments there. We'll get on to those. Merrilyn's education with needle and thread has been a combination of her natural ability and from the hundreds of customers and students she has connected with. Merrilyn opened her first shop on her 23rd birthday with no formal training in the creative arts, business, or with a needle and thread. Crikey, Merrilyn, we're going to have a lot to talk about that one, aren't we? She has a passion for sharing and has always been interested in the international trends. With the support of many people, Merrilyn started to release her self-published books on silk ribbon embroidery back in 1992. A true Pandora's box was opened to an amazing, crazy, inspirational adventure of travelling and teaching in New Zealand, the USA and the UK, as well as attending craft shows on the big island of Australia. Merrilyn flew so much in those years she would buy a whole year's parking at the Hobart airport. So I think we forgot to say that Merrilyn's actually in Tasmania. And Merrilyn says she is now in semi-retirement mode, creating and teaching in a format that works for her. And she says, "For as long as I can hold a needle, stitching will be a very important part of my life. Not only has it been my business, but it is also my calm and creative space." So welcome, Merrilyn, once again, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
Thank you, Sue. It's a real pleasure to be chatting with you this morning.
Absolutely. I can't think of a better Saturday night out than chatting with you. I do have herbal tea at the moment and not wine, but the wine, when I'm done, I'm definitely going to be on the wine.
Yes, I've got tea instead of, I didn't think I should have a second coffee while we were talking. So
yeah, I think you on 2 coffees and me on wine. Now that would have been quite interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it could have been.
Right, and before I forget, Merrilyn's links. So all these links will be on her episode of stitcherystories.com as usual, but you can get her on merrilynheazlewood.com.au, and you can mostly find her updating on Instagram. Right then, so Merrilyn, what have you been working on and what's got you excited at the moment, Merrilyn?
Oh, well, I'm on summer holidays, as is a lot of Australia. I'm really excited. I'm going to be playing with 3 things over the summertime. I either work on a model or a sample that students might have shown interest in, or I tend to really like to indulge myself and let my creativity just run with a new project.
Right.
So this summer I've got a project designed. It's based on the Derwent River, which is the main river coming into Hobart, with Mount Wellington in the background. It's going to start or end, whichever way you want to think of it, but the river starts up in the Highlands.
Yeah.
And I hold a retreat at an old hydro village, which has been modernised and adapted for accommodation. When they were building the hydro village, the managers lived in.
Right.
So these brightly coloured cottages, and they are brightly coloured, are a real feature of Taralier. So they are going to feature, as will the water pipes, because that's part of what Taralier is all about, is the water for creating the hydropower. So that's going to be at one end. It's going to be elongated, and then the river will meander down through, and there'll be Battery Point cottages, Mount Wellington in the background, and then the Iron Pot. Now, anybody who follows yacht racing and follows the Sydney to Hobart yacht race will know that when the yachts go around the Iron Pot, everybody knows that the yachts have entered the Derwent River. So they might have scooted down the east coast of Australia and Tasmania, and they get into the Derwent River and they becalmed for hours. So the Iron Pot is a bit of a little feature of Hobart, and it just sits very flat on the horizon. It's not up high. It is just simply there, and it's a marker for this yacht race. So there'll be some yachts on the river and, other things that I'll incorporate. So that's one project.
Wow, I was just going to say, Merrilyn, so there we are, everyone. You've got a geography tour of some of the highlights of Tasmania. And I've been to Tasmania quite a few times because my aunt lived near where Merrilyn used to have a shop. So we've had a few chats about Tasmania, and I thought lots of Tasmania was a bit like the Yorkshire Dales as well. So really nice. Yeah. And the other thing that I think we need to say is that all of this, did we say you really focus on Canvaswork, don't you? Is a real kind of passion of yours. So all of this is going on in Canvaswork, so you can get your thinking caps on with how you would translate all of that design into various styles of Canvaswork. So I think that's going to be something to look forward to, definitely.
Yeah, and again, if you follow me on Instagram, but you'll see how it'll develop. Last summer I did a cricket game.
Yes, you did. That's right, the cricket game. Yes.
And I had huge trouble with that, and I unpicked and I restitched and readapted, and I share all of that with you as I do it, so that you understand that the way I go about my designing, I just don't pre-draw it up. I certainly never pre-graph it with Canvaswork. I always work straight onto the canvas. So, and for these sort of little designs, like this river scene, I have done a drawing. So there is a very basic line drawing, which I've already shared, on what I've got in mind. But if I pre-plan too much, I alter it too much as I stitch it. So there's no point in pre-planning too much.
I think as well, obviously you've got such a lot of experience stitching, with the Canvaswork. I suppose when you get to a different bit, you can immediately think, oh, that kind of style of stitching will do that mountain or that river or the church or whatever it is. So and it was interesting following the cricket picture, because again, who the hell's ever done a cricket match in Canvaswork? Nobody, I don't think. So it was really interesting watching your process. Projects for the summer, you've got your river, and what else are you doing?
Oh, well, I am going to do a typical Merrilyn. I'm going to have a play with gold work threads. It's an area that I've steered clear of.
Steered clear of.
I steered clear of, because I know there are some fantastic people all around the world, especially in England, with gold work. And then one day I thought, don't be so stupid, just have a little play with it. Mm-hmm. It sort of started because of Golden Hind offered, when the Queen passed away, they offered a design of the Queen's profile that people could stitch in gold thread. And so I showed it to some of my students and said, would any of you be interested in that? And they said, oh, yes, please. And Australia had a public holiday on a Thursday to commemorate and remember the Queen's life. And so we had a session with high tea, and Paddington came.
Yes.
And we did a session of working this lovely profile. And I want to acknowledge Golden Hind for offering this to the stitching community. And that really got me going. A few students said, oh, I'd like to do a bit more of this. So I started to mull over what I could do. And I always need something to click for an inspiration. And I had in mind how I wanted to approach it.
Yeah.
Because it's got to be relatively simple, because I'm so limited in my experience of gold work. And I wanted to push the boundaries. I was watching TV and they dug up some dinosaur bones or something. And I thought, when I went to the Kimberley about 4 years ago, which is the opposite end of Australia to me, the northwest region of Australia, very ancient, very historical area, especially for Aboriginal artwork. I took a photo of an echidna. Now, an echidna is like a porcupine.
The cute, aren't the little echidnas? Long, pointy little nose as well.
But this is an aerial view. It's not a side view.
Right.
So anyway, I'll share the photo I took, acknowledge that it's a photo from the Kimberley region, and it's thousands of years old, this piece of artwork, rock artwork. And so that's now my inspiration.
Ooh.
How it will develop, I don't know.
Yeah, that is going to be fascinating. So a goldwork inspired Aboriginal art echidna. Marvellous.
Yeah.
Oh, that's going to be really interesting to watch. And the other thing I was just going to say is, obviously, Golden Hind is one of the kind of main suppliers of goldwork materials over in the UK. And Sarah Rakestraw, the founder of that, she was a guest a long time ago on Stitchery Stories. So I will also put the links in that episode so people can catch up with Sarah's story. You've got plenty to keep you going then.
Oh, yes. So yesterday I was mulling over a new three-dimensional piece, again, in Canvaswork.
Yeah.
The brain can think of, design and create things quicker than the hands can stitch them.
Never was a truer word spoken. Yeah, I think we all have a head full of ideas, don't we? And a big backlog of actual practical time to do them. And I certainly do.
Yeah.
I certainly do. I definitely spend more time talking about doing it than actually doing any stitching. But hey-ho, I admit that. I'm going to come back to that first statement, which was quite hilarious, really. You know, Merrilyn opened her first shop on her 23rd birthday with no formal training in the creative arts business or with needle and thread. What on earth was all that about? Come on, there's got to be a really good story in all of that, Merrilyn.
First of all, I'll go right back to the fact that I grew up in a hardworking farming family. My mother's family and my father's family, they came out as in the early 1800s as free settlers, either being brought out as indentured servants or coming out because of contacts here. So strong farming heritage.
Right.
And on my mother's side, more so, there's a strong art craft genetic streak.
Right.
And my mother was very artistic in three mediums. And I was born in the mid-50s. Back in the 60s, you still knitted or crocheted. My mother made her and my clothes. So handwork and creating and making was just part of daily life.
Yeah, definitely.
And I loved it. You know, my mum was very, very left-handed. So by the time I was 9, her mother had passed away. And her mother, Grandma, used to teach me the basic embroidery because Grandma was right-handed.
Right, yeah.
So after Grandma died, Mum really couldn't teach me to knit or to crochet, and I evidently taught myself to crochet.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. With her being left-handed and you obviously not, yeah.
Yeah. So when I had the idea of the shop, and we discussed it, she said, oh, well, you taught yourself to crochet. And I said, yes, but so what? And she said, oh, most people at the age of 10 or 11, whatever I was, wouldn't have been able to do that. I'd been invited to use a spinning wheel in my mid-teens, and actually at school, someone came into the school I was at and got us to use a spinning wheel, and most people can't use a spinning wheel straight away because of the motion of using your feet and hands. It's quite different. And I sat down and did that, and the lady showing us just said, oh, you're a natural at this. So that built up. So that was sort of in the background.
Right, yeah,
and then the department store that had the best range of craft items in as we say, Launceston, in my hometown of Launceston. It closed, and I had worked and saved for 4 years my own money. And in those days, what people would do they would either do probably do tertiary education, work and save, and then go to England on a boat for 6 weeks. So they'd go by cruise ship, by boat to England and have the European holiday. And I had no desire to do that whatsoever. So instead of going to England and having a holiday, I just started a shop.
So you saved up and you used your savings to open your shop. Fabulous.
Yeah, and certainly because of my age, I didn't realise it at the time, but I had massive support. Everybody I talked to said, yes, go for it. It's worth giving it a try.
See how you go. Yeah.
See how you go. And I had some fantastic agents in those days. And Coates Payton's was all the knitting wool that came from Coates Payton's was produced in Launceston. They had a very big knitting mill in Launceston. So they had a strong contact to Launceston as well. So they were one of the first people I went and talked to, So all along the road, I've had masses of people support me. Yes, it's been an incredible journey. Very scary at times.
Yes.
It's been amazing.
That is such a brilliant story. It really is. And hats off to you, Merrilyn. So you don't have shops now, do you?
No, I haven't had a shop since the early 90s.
Right, okay. You'd had enough of shops, yeah. Wanted to do something else.
I wanted to do something else. And yes, please be courteous, generous, thoughtful to your local needlework retailer or craft needlework retailer, because it's a very demanding business, as in the majority of people that come in want some form of help, and now the product range that is available is just massive, and it's very demanding, but it was lots of fun, and it trained me really well.
It trained you.
Yep. The shop and the customers trained me, so yeah.
So what brought you to Canvaswork, cross stitch, those styles, and then the silk ribbon? Did you see the products and thought, oh, I want to put those in my shop, and therefore I need to, design with them? How did you actually get into those? Because they've been the kind of constant, haven't they, Merrilyn, through your creative career? So tell me a bit more about how you hooked into those styles.
Counted cross stitch was really, really new in Australia when I opened the shop in 78.
Right.
What the shop was initially built on was tapestry.
Yeah.
Like the English think of tapestry.
Yeah.
Macrame, gluing crafts, lampshades, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I did my first piece of counted cross stitch by buying a kit direct from Denmark. And then cross stitch became more and more imported by the distributors into Australia.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the Danish Handcraft Guild style of design and the enjoyment of counting and working from a graph. So the counted cross stitch launched me into all the counted thread mediums, which I just love.
As it does, yes.
And included in that was counted canvas work. And so all through the shop days, I've done counter canvas work, and I would play around with changing the background to even on double threaded canvas. I'd have a trammed tapestry and stitch that, but play around and work the background in stranded cotton, but do it in a Gobelin stitch rather than in tent stitch or a traditional stitch.
Yeah.
So I was always, I suppose, thinking of trying to give something new and different to my customers.
Right. Yes.
My priority was to try and give them something new and a bit different to think about.
Right. What a really good guiding principle as the shop owner. What do they want? Because I suppose if you're always bringing new things to them, you're always going to have new things to sell, aren't you? Let's face it. Let's be blunt.
Yes, you are, and it gives them a different idea.
Yes,
like when I started, a tram tapestry would normally be stitched in, say, an ecru background or a Wedgwood blue or maybe black, and I stitched a background in a bright emerald green colour in stranded cotton. If nothing else, it gave customers something a bit different to think about.
Yeah.
It's what I've found over the years, and I'll often say it to students, I'm going to give you a suggestion and push you into a direction, and you probably won't like it and you won't do it. But what it means is you'll bounce back with more confidence into an area that you want to work in.
Yeah, what a good point.
Or with a colour or whatever. All through my shop days, I carried screen printed tapestries on Penelope canvas, and tram tapestries, Bargello, and counted Canvaswork. Another thing is that freeform wool embroidery has always been part of the Australian needlework heritage.
Right.
So you would embroider a baby's blanket.
The wool embroidery on like wool baby's blankets with the lovely, it gets quite dimensional, doesn't it? Like the roses and that kind of thing with the wool thread. Right. Lovely.
Yes. So what today we would probably term I term freeform embroidery was always around, because some people would have a pattern or a transfer they'd follow, but quite a few people would just simply freeform, maybe, with help and guidance, but they would freeform flowers, or they would applique a teddy bear on in felt and then freeform flowers around it. So freeform wool embroidery has been part of my life. The 80s and 90s was such an interesting couple of decades in Australia. And we had a few people who were doing wool embroidery that had taken it from the baby blanket and started to create pictures and designs, inspirations. Had a piece of work in the first issue. So I would think that started probably about 92, 93.
Right, so Inspirations magazine, yes, it's a beautiful magazine, isn't it?
So all of these things have sort of been just there in the background, and I've just been lucky enough to be able to play with it, develop it. When I started to work with silk ribbon, I was doing quite different work to, say, Jenny Bradford, who was the other very well-known Australian author.
I think I've got one of her books. That name rings a bell,
Heather Joins was another Australian doing ribbon and silk ribbon. She wrote some books. So the silk ribbon medium just suited me beautifully. And I designed a 16 square sampler, which I was using as a teaching project in the shop. And I would have mainlanders, as we call them, the people that live on the big island of Australia, we call mainlanders. They'd come and visit family and friends and look for a needlework shop like you do. And I just got so many comments about the silk ribbon I was doing and how different it was to Jenny Bradford's.
Brilliant.
And I was probably getting to the stage of wanting another challenge. And that's where the idea for producing a book came.
Right.
And I approached one of the publishing companies, and those negotiations weren't progressing. So I took the big step to self-publish. Then meant I had to promote the books, else they just sat in boxes.
But back when you was doing that, self-publishing was so much more of a challenge. I mean, it's not easy. Yeah. It's not easy now, but it's so much easier now than it was when you first decided to start self-publishing. So yeah, hats off to you again with another challenge there, Merrilyn, to self-publish. So, and you've done what, 7, 8, 9 books, something like that, if I remember rightly?
Yes. And we are going to eventually, we've been talking about this, but we're going to get them as a download on the website. It hasn't been done yet. Mm-hmm. But if people sign up to my newsletter, I only ever bring out a newsletter when I've got something important to say. So it might only be 3 or 4 times a year. So if I'm releasing a new class or a new workshop or something that I want to share. So if nothing else, if people sign up to the newsletter, once we've got the books as a download, because it now with shipping costs and delays.
Exactly, yeah.
Just exorbitant to have them being shipped. So self-published, and the first book was done. Everything was still literally cut and paste with the graphic designer.
Yeah. So
that was the early 90s. It was, a real cut and paste with the graphic designer. So it's been a really interesting journey.
Really brilliant. And the silk, there's one of the images, in fact, the one that I'm going to use for your episode artwork, I think sums up your creativity there in combining canvas work and the silk ribbon. And it's a beautiful image of fuchsias. So the fuchsias are in the different ribbons, and then you've got the canvas work, and it's absolutely beautiful. Is that that's a really eye-catching piece. I really like that, Merrilyn. So people will be able to. That's one of the pieces that would be really nice to share. And is that still available as a kit or something, if I remember?
Yeah. Yes, it certainly is. It's available as a kit online. The fuchsias and silk ribbon just work beautifully.
Just gorgeous, aren't they?
If I can just go back to the book, some of the early books aren't in full colour, because in those days to produce full colour was very expensive.
Yeah.
And I was putting my toe in the water for publishing. Second book is just on fuchsias with 2, 4 and 7 millimetre ribbon. Now the fuchsias that you're talking about, it's called glasshouse fuchsias.
Glasshouse fuchsias, right.
I was inspired to do this project because in our Hobart Botanical Gardens, we have an old glass house. When I was writing the first silk ribbon book on fuchsias, I would go to the botanical gardens to study the flowers, because that's something I like to think I do, is interpret the flower correctly. So I'm forever checking botanical books and everything to make sure they're correct. So I'd go there for inspiration, and that's where I got the idea with the canvas work of just very lightly stitching the canvas. Canvas work is done on intertwined or interlocked 18 count white canvas.
Right.
And the stitching is done with a mixture of 2 or 3 strands of floss or strand of cotton, pearl 8, pearl 12, and also some pearl 5. So where the fuchsias are eventually embroidered over the canvas work, the stitching on the canvas in the canvas work stitches is very light, so that the holes aren't clogged up. So that if you need to take the ribbon through the canvas, the ribbon will fit, because the ribbon is 13 millimetre. It's the wider ribbon. It's 13 millimetre. It's the good silk ribbon. It's got a selvage edge to it. And they're hand-dyed, variegated ribbons. So you get not only the thickness of the ribbon, but you get this beautiful play because of the colour variation within the colours of the ribbon. Yep. So that design, I had that designed in about 2 minutes. When the design came to me for that, it just, I was actually teaching in Brisbane, and I woke up one morning about 2:00 in the morning and I thought, oh, that's what I'll do. And so sometimes the design can take months or years to develop, but that one developed very, very quickly.
And as you say, it comes into your head. You might do a small kind of outline drawing, a sketch to kind of keep your ideas in line, as it were. But then after that, it's try it, play, see what happens, and then write it up later.
Yes, I make notes all the time. I have to be making notes all the time as I stitch, so that I know how many threads I've worked with and what thread, and then it goes into the hours and hours and hours of typing up the notes and doing the graphs. So the stitching's the fun part.
It's like lots of things, isn't it? The kind of bit that you see is, the fun bit, and is probably 20% of the work, and the rest is the graphing and, all the things that you need to do to bring one of these designs alive and practical for somebody to, to then be able to work through as a kit as well, for example.
Yeah.
So what would you say then, Merrilyn, with, you've done your books, you've been doing a lot of teaching and things as well. So is there any particular high points to this journey so far?
I would have to say the people I've met.
Oh, well, how lovely.
Always the people I've met and the locations I've been to. In the 90s, I was doing a lot of work in the US, New Zealand, and I would come to the UK every year. I would come and go to a trade show at Birmingham, and then I'd hire a car, go and teach in shops around the UK.
Oh, wow.
So I'd hop in a hire car. I'd say, yes, I'll drive, but I have to have sticky notes of everything. If I come to a roundabout, do I take the second or the third turn? Because, for me, we're coming from an island state of the population then of not even 500,000.
Yeah.
And 2-lane highways weren't really a thing. To come to England to drive and to be working. It wasn't as if I was there for a holiday. But anyway, I'd hire a car and drive around. I met some fantastic people. Just the experience of going and teaching in these locations, always the people, and then the locations that I've been to.
I think to then have the tour coming to these places and doing that for a number of years speaks volumes as well. It's like a foreign travelling tutor. Again, not easy to organise either.
Yes, and I did go to the US quite a lot. And so there were parts of the US that I've been to, even in the more recent years. I'm not going to travel and teach anymore in the US. I do online class.
Yeah, I was going to say we'll talk about a move away from the in-person international training, teaching, and how you've changed the way you do that. So we'll come on to that as the next point.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been to states and areas of America I would never, ever have gone to as a tourist. And again, it's always the people. It's the people that have supported me, and I would never, ever have achieved what I've done without the support.
Yeah. And as I've chatted with many other guests, it often comes down to the who'd have thought that you could have such a fabulous international career, travelling around, doing all these things with embroidery, with textile art. It's quite staggering, actually, in a lot of respects, the places and the things that so many artists and, business entrepreneurs have managed to achieve through providing teaching and inspiration in such a lovely art form. It's just like, what is there not to love about it?
Exactly. Going into the USA, I put down author. You have to say your occupation. And I was going there for my book, so I'd put author. And it was always interesting with people at customs. Oh, you're a well-known author. And I had to learn to say that I write craft books.
Obviously, you've done all that traveling. Now, how have you embraced more of the online world to help you do that, Merrilyn?
Okay, we'll just step back a little bit. I did have a few years break. I actually got very, very tired by the end of the 90s, and first decade of this century, I really had a good break. And then various reasons, I just gradually got back into stitching.
You couldn't escape, could you?
No, I was always stitching, but I opened it up again. So I'll share with your listeners that I selected needlepoint or Canvaswork because I want longevity. And some forms of stitching, you've got to put a lot more pressure on the needle to get the needle through the fabric or whatever you're doing, or your needle is too fine. So I wanted longevity with my stitching. So Canvaswork is not a difficult technique to do because of the style of thread I select to stitch with.
Good point.
I work on 18 count mono. It's a single thread, either interlocked or not interlocked. And I work a lot with an Australian brand of thread called Gumnut Yarns. And I use their poppies, which is 50% wool, 50% silk. There are other companies around the world that make that style of thread or have that style of thread available. So I work with a thread that gets a good coverage, but it's not difficult to thread the needle and or more so to pull it through.
It glides through.
Yeah.
There's no stress then, is there? You're not tugging.
No.
Right.
No.
What a good point. Do you know, Merrilyn, nobody has ever mentioned that topic. Wow.
Yeah.
And actually, it makes perfect sense.
It does. And also for your eyes.
Yeah.
I have a very wonderful relationship with my local needlework shop, which I actually owned years ago. But there's a new owner there, and she is brilliant. But counted cross stitch is huge at the moment, and on super fine linen, they're talking 40 threads to the inch. And I just say no, I just can't comprehend it, and I don't want to put my eyes or my hands under that pressure.
The thought of some of these, my eyesight's has always been bad anyway, but it's like, oh my God, it's hard work, and I don't want my hobby to be hard work.
Yeah.
I spend all my time staring at screens and tapping on keyboards and have done for the last 30 odd years. So, I can totally understand that. We don't want to be peering at things either. That's bad for you.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Cool.
And I stitch, while we're just on this, I stitch with a Q-snap a lot, or maybe a scroll frame, but I stitch with a frame. And that's another thing with Canvaswork. It is better if you stitch with a frame.
Yeah.
And the best 200 Australian dollars I've ever spent is a Lowry frame. I just adore my Lowry frame. So they're English stainless steel floor standing frame, and they are just brilliant. It's the best money I've ever put into a working frame. Or support for a working frame. All of that just helps, my back and shoulders and
exactly.
And your hands. If you're holding a frame or a hoop in one hand, it just, and also you can stitch quicker. If on the Lowry frame, two hands
is a lot more efficient for your hands, isn't it? So so they're all good points which help with the, as you say, the longevity of being able to carry on stitching how you want. So you took a break, you've really thought about the dynamics, ergonomics of stitching. So where are you at with that now?
Oh, okay. So now I was submitted and was invited to teach for the two guilds in the USA. So there's a needlepoint guild in the USA and the Embroidery Guild of America. And so I was selected to teach on the ground there pre-2020. There's a lot involved now. Even then, there was a lot involved. You need to have a temporary work visa. And on one of my trips, I got my passport back on the Monday and I left on the Friday.
Oh, stress.
and it was always to a national seminar, and then I'd often be invited to teach for other guilds or regions of the guild in America as well.
Yeah.
And the stress of it, and I just don't enjoy it. When I was travelling with my books in the 1990s, I loved it. I loved the travelling until I got absolutely exhausted. But it never worried me getting on a plane. Whereas now, it's not a pleasure to travel.
Yeah.
And I'd also or frequently been selected to teach with both of these guilds as to what they call an online or cyber class. Now, this is, again, pre-2020, where the students book online, and depending on the format of the class or the workshop can have a set period of 6 weeks or various variations on that.
Right.
So they offer a different range. So I've kept up with that. This year, I actually had 4 or 5 classes at one stage. Anyone can do those courses. They just need to join the guild to be able to do those courses.
And how are they delivered? Were they like through Zoom? Are they live streamed? Or are they?
No, nothing live, which helps for the time frame difference.
Right, that's what I was wondering. Yeah, so they're not live streamed. Yeah.
Got to think 2010 online, not 2022.
Yeah, that's what I was worrying, because everybody suddenly got into Zoom and stuff, in 2020. I've been working Zoom since it's been invented, and so had other freelancers, but I think the creative world, just not at all. So I was just quite intrigued as to, because people's terminology of an online course, it can be so varied. So
the Guild will send the students the instructions via download. PDFs, yeah.
Yeah.
And
right.
and the students can they'll have options and they work with the tutors, but I always offer they don't have to buy a kit. If I've used Australian threads, I always offer a part kit, or they can buy a full kit of the threads.
Yeah.
Which includes the threads and the canvas. So that's how those classes work.
That makes a lot of sense now. I understand that.
So I'm now making the business work for me. And during COVID lockdowns and everything, I started the retreat at Tarraleah. So going right back to the beginning of our conversation, I decided that I would organise to have a retreat here in Tasmania for up to 9 students. A
small group, yeah.
Really small group. The only prerequisite is that they have to stitch one of my designs or from one of my books.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a come along and sit and stitch. It is 2 days of teaching. And I take my teaching seriously, which I don't know whether it's a good thing or not. But, to me, when I'm in a classroom, I'm there to share and enthuse and encourage people. A bit of chitter-chatter is nice.
Crack on and teach, yeah.
Crack on and teach. So we have a lovely time. So I developed the Apple Isle retreats in the year of COVID. So we have that once a year. And life just gets busy. I'm very, very content. I allow my stitching to do what I want it to do. It's very, very easy when you've got a business to let the business run your life, not you run the business.
Very, very true. Yes. What I really like is the fact that whilst everybody was like rushing online, you've kind of gone in the opposite direction now. You've got your in-person retreats back again. So I think that's a really nice way that I can see it's gone full circle for you, hasn't it, Merrilyn?
Yep, that's right.
And it's been really great for you to share that journey with us, Merrilyn, because, you started off with your shop at a very early age. You've carried on, you've done all of these things. And that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to have a chat with you, is to really just share that journey and to show everybody there's no rules that say you have to have done these things to have a shop, or you have to have done these things to have a book. And I've had enough guests who have book deal has kind of happened, or started running a shop, or they've done, they've just been doing online stuff, or, there's so many things that people can do. And I think you've really shown that anything's possible. Give it a try.
Thank you, Susan. Well, that's really just been in the background that give it a try. What have you got to lose?
Yeah.
Your health is the most important thing, that you mustn't lose. Now we haven't talked about licking our thread.
Go on then. Yes, I'd forgotten about that. Thanks for reminding me. Right, licking your thread. What's the problem?
Okay, what's your problem? As a teacher, to handle somebody's work when they have licked a thread is not very pleasant.
Yes,
and
yes, of course.
The very first class I took for adult education, here was I 23, and most of my students were older than me. But a girl came along and she licked tapestry wool. And I then went to help her, and the end of this tapestry wool was all wet and yucky. And so it started from there. And then it became a joke. The bigger the shop got, the more teachers I had. So I will do knots, that's fine, but I don't lick a thread. So some of my tutors would say, oh, you're in my class, you can lick a thread. Don't tell Merrilyn, she's out in the shop, she won't hear. And then more seriously, AIDS came along. So when AIDS came along, we really didn't know whether it was safe to lick threads. And that's when we became very serious.
Well, I suppose we've just had the pandemic as well. Well, it's still ongoing. So again, it really does. Again, what you've said makes complete and utter sense. Yeah. Because I'm thinking there's probably other reasons as well. I suppose if you're doing some kind of heritage stuff, then you've just put germs on it as well. Yeah, for many reasons, it's probably an absolute no-go. I'll really try hard not to lick threads anymore.
Look, there are good needle threaders now. And I've got one student and she turns her back on me to lick her threads and thread the needle. We just all laugh about it. So,
Oh, I think that's a brilliant story and a brilliant point of view there to end our chat today, Merrilyn.
Thank you, Sue. And yet again, it is a person on the other side of the world connected through needle and thread that has made my day. So this has just been brilliant. Thank you, Sue.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Somebody actually, I will just say this little story. Somebody shared with me a couple of weeks ago now. They were looking at some characters, Shrek, some crocheted characters, and this lady had posted, today I was hanging out with some characters who are normally seen behind a screen, and then there was a picture of me and Susan as well, and yes, that is me. I am a character that hangs about behind screens for so many people. So it's a lovely way to connect, isn't it? And we're all blessed that it's so easy for us to make friends at the other side of the world through needle and thread. So on that uplifting point of view, I shall leave you, and thank you, everybody. I've really, really enjoyed chatting with you today, Merrilyn. It's been an absolute treat, really has. So everybody, I'll be obviously sharing different images of Merrilyn's as well. She'll have an episode on Stitchery Stories with all the links and various other links and bits and pieces of information on there. Merrilyn, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan.